Agatha Raisin and the Bill Wong's Last Warning on an unusually quiet morning in Carsely. As Agatha Raisin enjoyed her tea and the gentle hush of the village, a mysterious envelope slipped under her door, and inside, a cryptic warning from Bill Wong hinted that her peaceful day was about to unravel. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you relaxing at home, on the go, or somewhere a bit unexpected? Share your answer in the comment. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story.
Chapter 1. The Message No One Expected. The morning light filtered gently through the kitchen curtains of Agatha Raisin's cottage, settling in warm, buttery patches across the wooden floor. Agatha stood beside her small table, cupping a steaming mug of tea between her palms. It was an unusually still morning, almost suspiciously calm, and she found herself listening for the familiar clatter of village life beyond her windows. Carsely usually woke in layers of sound, dogs barking, neighbors calling out greetings, the clink of milk bottles on old stone steps. Today there was none of that. The quiet felt padded, deliberate, as if someone had folded the village into a blanket and tucked away every stirring note. Agatha lifted her mug again, but the silence pressed oddly against her senses, nudging a faint thread of unease. She tried brushing it off. After all, quiet mornings were supposed to be pleasant, especially for a woman who had spent far too many years wrestling with the chaos of London. Peace should have been welcome, yet Agatha felt as if the village were holding its breath, waiting for something she could not yet see. She tapped her fingers on the table, irritated by her own restlessness. She wandered to the window, leaning slightly as she peered out onto the lane. The hedges stood still, unruffled by wind. A bicycle leaned against a gate several houses down, untouched. Even the birds seemed reluctant to begin their usual chatter. Agatha narrowed her eyes, scanning the lane for any sign of movement, but everything remained perfectly, suspiciously normal. Deciding the morning needed rescuing, she returned to the table and refreshed her tea. As she stirred the spoon, she let her shoulders soften. Perhaps she was overthinking things. Nothing unusual, she told herself, though the certainty didn't fully settle. She sat again, intending to enjoy the rest of her tea, in stubborn defiance of her nerves, when a faint sound near the front door made her pause mid-sip. It wasn't a knock, more like a soft slide, the whisper of paper brushing across wood. Agatha set her mug down with a muted clink. For a moment she listened again, letting the quiet stretch around her. Then she rose and crossed the room, each step measured, though she scolded herself for indulging the tension gathering in her chest. At the door, a small cream-colored envelope lay neatly against the floorboards, as if placed with care rather than tossed. Agatha crouched and picked it up. The paper felt oddly weighty between her fingers, not heavy exactly, but purposeful. There was no return address, no name, only her own, written in urgent, unfamiliar handwriting. She frowned, turning the envelope over, as a prickle of curiosity rushed through her. She straightened, holding the envelope up to the light as though it might reveal its purpose. Letters from villagers usually carried predictable tones, complaints about hedges, invitations to bake sales, or gossip thinly disguised as concern. This felt different. The handwriting leaned sharply to the right, pressed deep enough to indent the paper. Someone had written this quickly, perhaps anxiously, and slipped it under her door without waiting. Agatha lingered near the doorway, the weight of the envelope strangely grounding. She considered opening it immediately, but hesitation tugged at her. What if it was nothing more than a dramatic neighbor demanding help with a trivial matter? Yet the sense of expectation hanging in the quiet told her otherwise. She drew a slow breath, trying to steady the odd flutter in her chest. Finally, she carried the envelope back to the table and sat down, placing it gently beside her cooling tea. The hush around her remained as if the village itself waited for her next move. Agatha touched the flap, feeling a tremor of anticipation there. Agatha rested her fingers on the envelope a moment longer, before finally tearing the flap open. The paper inside crackled faintly, and a single sheet slid into her hand. She expected a polite message, or perhaps a familiar complaint, but the first line tightened her breath. It was from Bill Wong today. Bill never wrote notes. He preferred calling, appearing in person, or sighing loudly until Agatha agreed to help him. Seeing his handwriting now, jagged and hurried, unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She smoothed the page flat on the table and read the short message that seemed to throb quietly. The message was barely 2 sentences, but each carried a weight that pressed into her chest. Bill wrote that he needed her help immediately, that something from an old case had resurfaced, and that she must find him before it was too late. No explanation followed, only his signature, abruptly scrawled there. Agatha lowered the note slowly, feeling a ripple of annoyance cut through her worry. Bill had a talent for inviting trouble, but he rarely sounded afraid. His tone now, even through ink, trembled. She reached for her phone, punched his number, and waited for the familiar ring that always soothed her nerves. Instead, only silence answered. She tried again, pressing the phone harder to her ear as if that would coax the call through. Still nothing. The line wasn't busy. It was simply dead. Agatha straightened, alarm sharpening her movements. If Bill had turned his phone off, something must have driven him to it. She folded the note, slipped it into her pocket, and hurried upstairs to dress. The cottage, once cozy and calm, now felt narrower, as if the walls leaned in to listen. She moved quickly, choosing practical clothes, her mind racing through possibilities. Bill's warning echoed in fragments she could not yet assemble fully. By the time she reached the front door again, she felt the familiar blend of irritation and responsibility settling over her. Bill always managed to pull her into mysteries she pretended to resist. Still, the unease in his note made this one different. She knew she couldn't ignore it. Not this time. She pulled the door open and stepped onto the threshold, pausing to scan the quiet lane. The crisp air brushed her face, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. For a moment, everything looked as still as it had earlier. Then she noticed a figure standing far down the lane, perfectly motionless. The figure's posture suggested they had been there for some time, watching her cottage with careful intent. Agatha narrowed her eyes, trying to see more, but the distance blurred the details. A pulse of unease tightened her chest. That figure didn't linger long. It turned slowly and walked away quietly. Agatha remained still a moment longer, gripping the doorframe as she watched the lane return to its unnatural calm. The quiet no longer soothed. It pressed around her like a warning. She locked the door behind her, slid the note deeper into her pocket, and stepped forward, determined to uncover whatever waited. As she walked down the familiar path, the cottages lining the lane seemed altered, as though shadows clung more tightly to their corners. She resisted the urge to glance behind her, focusing instead on Bill's message. Every step deepened her resolve, yet uncertainty curled quietly at the back of her thoughts. By the time she neared the end of the lane, the village felt different, as if its gentle rhythms had shifted out of place. Agatha paused, letting the quiet settle around her once more. She touched the note in her pocket, sensing its warning like a pulse guiding her next move.
Chapter 2. The Village Doesn't Speak. The village of Carsely felt different that morning, as if the very air had stiffened overnight. Agatha Raisin walked along the cobbled lane, her boots clicking softly against the worn stones. Usually, mornings in Carsely were alive with the soft chatter of neighbors, the distant clatter of the bakery doors opening, and the scent of fresh bread wafting from ovens. Today, however, an unusual hush hung over the streets. Windows remained shuttered, and the few villagers she passed darted quick glances her way before whispering hurriedly amongst themselves. There was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks.
Agatha furrowed her brow, adjusting the scarf around her neck as she navigated toward the village center. The unease pressed at her senses, but she refused to let it unsettle her entirely. She had a purpose: finding Bill Wong. The cryptic message from him still throbbed in her mind, each word weighing heavier with each step she took. Every familiar sight now seemed subtly altered. The butcher's cat was curled in its usual window, but its ears twitched nervously at passing sounds. A bakery door that usually swung open to welcome customers remained firmly closed. Even the town clock seemed to tick with an edge she had never noticed before. She paused outside Mrs. Bloxby's quaint tea shop, the scent of brewing Earl Grey faintly drifting through the cracked open window. The elderly woman was arranging pastries behind the counter, her hands shaking just slightly, though she tried to appear composed. "Good morning, Mrs. Bloxby," Agatha greeted, tilting her head with polite curiosity. Mrs. Bloxby's smile was hesitant, almost fragile, as she set down the teacup and gestured for Agatha to enter. "Morning, dear. Bill hasn't been himself lately," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. She seemed to struggle with the words, lingering on the sentence as if the confession were a weight she could hardly bear. He mentioned something troubling, but I'm not sure how much you should know," she added, glancing nervously toward the door. Agatha's frustration prickled at the edges. The villagers were all acting strangely, each interaction laden with restraint and secrecy, yet each clue was tantalizingly incomplete. She forced a calm smile, taking the offered cup of tea, though the liquid did little to soothe her racing mind. "Thank you, Mrs. Bloxby," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I'll be careful. I just need to find him." Setting the teacup down, Agatha left the shop, her eyes scanning the streets for any hint of movement. She retraced steps she thought Bill might have taken the previous evening, noting subtle details: the slight disturbance of leaves on the lane, a gate left ajar, a newspaper fluttering against a wall. She noticed how villagers avoided eye contact, as if even acknowledging her might force a confession from them. It was almost as if Carsely itself had become a conspirator, holding its secrets tight within cobblestone and brick. Turning onto the village green, Agatha paused mid-step. The dew-covered grass revealed a trail, fresh footprints, small but clear, leading into a narrow, shaded side path that was rarely used. Her pulse quickened. These were not casual steps. Someone had passed this way in the last hours, and the prints were too deliberate to be mere coincidence. A shiver of anticipation ran down her spine as she bent slightly to examine the pattern. Each print seemed to whisper questions. Where had they been? Who else knew? And most importantly, would they lead her closer to Bill or deeper into danger? Agatha straightened up, inhaling the crisp morning air, determination sharpening in her gaze. The quiet of Carsely no longer felt peaceful. It hummed with withheld information, hushed warnings, and the unspoken knowledge of a village that seemed to watch and wait. The path before her, narrow and overgrown, beckoned with both promise and peril. Agatha followed the fresh footprints along the edge of the village green, her sensible shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The path narrowed quickly, shaded by overgrown hedges that had long been left to their own devices. Sunlight filtered in unevenly through the branches, casting mottled patterns on the ground. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very path were aware of the tension tightening inside her. She gripped the envelope from Bill Wong a little tighter in her coat pocket, reminding herself that this trail might finally lead to answers, or at least to him. The footprints ended at a small hollow between two elder bushes. Agatha paused, scanning the undergrowth, when a glint of metal caught her eye. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away damp soil and fallen leaves. Her heart skipped as a familiar insignia came into view. Bill's police badge lay half-buried, scuffed along the edges and slightly bent. Her breath caught. This was no ordinary misplacement. Someone had dropped it, or worse, someone had left it deliberately. The thought made her pulse quicken, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. She straightened and surveyed the ground around her more carefully. There were signs of a struggle. A broken branch, freshly snapped, pointed toward a shallow rut in the soft earth. A faint drag mark suggested someone had been moved or carried along the path. Her mind raced through possibilities, weighing each one like a puzzle she had to solve in real time. Panic fluttered briefly, but she shoved it aside. There was no use in trembling when answers might be mere feet away. Her eyes darted along the narrow hedgerow, searching for further clues, when a sudden sharp ring cut through the quiet. A bicycle bell clanged lightly behind her. She spun around to see a small boy standing at the path's entrance. His hair was tousled, and his pale face betrayed how frightened he must be. He clutched the handlebars of his small bicycle with a trembling grip, his wide eyes fixed on her. "I saw something last night," he said, low and shaky. "But I can't tell here. Not here. It's not safe." His gaze flicked nervously toward the shadows at the edges of the hedges. Agatha softened immediately, crouching slightly to lower herself to his level. "You're safe with me," she said, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "We can move somewhere else, a place where no one can see us. Can you show me what happened?" The boy hesitated, glancing back down the path he had just traveled. Finally he nodded, shifting his bicycle a step closer to Agatha. Together they moved a few paces into a small clearing where sunlight broke through fully, illuminating the scattered leaves. Even in the warmth, the air felt charged, as if the trees themselves held their breath. Agatha noted every detail: the angle of the drag marks, the broken twigs, the way the shadows played across the ground. Each piece of evidence heightened the sense of hidden danger, yet she felt grounded, curious and alert. The boy finally whispered, I saw him, a man. He was there, by the old shed. And Bill was there too, but he ran." His voice faltered, and he swallowed hard, refusing to go on. Agatha placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. She didn't press, knowing that forcing him now would only shut him down. Instead, she allowed the quiet to stretch between them, letting the child's fear and the path's tension mingle, creating a corridor of unease she could navigate carefully. Agatha looked back at the hedge-lined path. Bill's badge glinted faintly in the sunlight once more, a silent reminder of urgency and danger. She knew the answers were here somewhere, threaded through these footprints and shadows. With a deep breath, she resolved to follow the trail, keeping the boy nearby, aware that this quiet path now held more than just leaves and branches. It held the first threads of a mystery that might finally reveal itself.
Chapter 3. Bill's Last Known Steps. Agatha guided the boy carefully along the cobbled path toward the small bench near the church. The late morning sun spilled across the stone, warming the seat and giving the small square a feeling of safety, almost like a pause in the world's rhythm. Leo clutched the handlebars of his bicycle tightly, his small fingers white against the metal. He glanced nervously over his shoulder as they walked, as if shadows themselves might be following them. Once seated, Agatha knelt in front of him, resting her hands lightly on her knees. "You're safe here," she said softly, her voice measured, calm. "Take your time. I need you to tell me what you saw, and nothing will hurt you while we're on this bench." She noticed the faint tremble in his jaw and the way his feet fidgeted against the ground. Children, she thought, often remembered far more than adults expected, even when fear threatened to overshadow their clarity. Leo drew in a deep breath, his small chest rising and falling as he tried to steady himself. "It was late," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw Mr. Wong. He was at the edge of the lane, and there was a man in a dark coat. They were talking. No, arguing." He pressed a hand to his mouth as though to stop words from tumbling further than they should. "I didn't see all of it. I was hiding behind the wall. But I heard something fall. Metallic. Clang. Like a cup or a badge. Maybe both?" Agatha nodded slowly, absorbing each detail. The metallic sound made her pulse quicken. Bill's badge? Could it have been dropped again? Her mind replayed the evidence from the path,
the scuffed marks, the drag, the glint of metal he had found earlier. It all aligned with a scenario far more deliberate than a simple misplacement. She kept her tone gentle, careful not to startle him further. "That was very brave of you, Leo. Thank you for telling me. Can you tell me more about the man?" The boy nodded cautiously. "He was tall, kind of thin. I couldn't see his face clearly. The coat was dark, long, and it moved with him, like he wanted to hide in the shadows. I've seen him before, though. He moved into the old cottage at the edge of the village. Nobody talks about him much. I think he's new." Leo's eyes widened slightly, as if sharing the knowledge was a dangerous act in itself. Agatha's mind raced, matching the description to the cottages she knew well. There was one building long abandoned, overgrown with ivy, tucked behind a low wall at the far end of the village. New renters had arrived recently. Rumor whispered, though no one knew much about them. The silhouette Leo described could belong to any stranger, but combined with Bill's warning and the mysterious metallic noise, the pieces suddenly felt urgent. She leaned forward, keeping her voice steady but encouraging. "Thank you, Leo. You've given me something important. Can you show me where the man's cottage is so I can see it myself?" Leo shook his head quickly. "No, it's not safe for me. I can't, but I wanted you to know. That's why I told you." His gaze dropped to his lap, small hands gripping the handlebars as though they could anchor him to safety. Agatha smiled faintly, hiding the rush of her own anticipation. "Very well. You've done exactly the right thing. Go home now. Stay safe. You've been incredibly helpful." She stood, brushing off her skirt, and gave him a nod of reassurance. The boy pushed his bicycle forward, glancing back once before turning the corner. Agatha watched him disappear, then took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sun mix with the urgency of her thoughts. Bill's last known movements were becoming clearer, though still tangled with unknowns. She folded her hands, staring down the lane toward the edge of the village, imagining the shadowed cottage and the mysterious newcomer within. Somewhere in that quiet stretch, the first threads of the evening's danger were already pulling tight. Agatha approached the cottage slowly, the gravel crunching softly under her shoes. The ivy had grown unchecked over the old stone walls, and the small garden in front looked as though no one had tended it for weeks. She noticed immediately that the curtains were drawn tight across every window, cutting off the soft morning light. A shiver of unease passed over her. The place was quiet, too quiet, and it seemed deliberately so. She raised her hand and knocked firmly on the door. 1, 2, 3 knocks echoed briefly across the empty lane. No reply. Agatha's brow furrowed. Perhaps the occupant was out. Perhaps this was simply another silent house, a cottage abandoned in all but name. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside, watching, waiting. She pressed her ear to the door for a moment, catching only the faint hum of wind through the cracks. Nothing else. A subtle, acrid smell drifted from a narrow gap in one of the windows. Agatha inhaled carefully, recognizing it immediately. Something burnt, faint, but unmistakable. It didn't belong to the cottage itself. Someone had set a fire, or attempted one, recently. The knowledge made her pulse quicken. She crouched slightly, inspecting the ground around the side of the house. The soil was damp from last night's drizzle, and fresh muddy boot prints led toward the back, toward the darker edges where shadows pooled beneath the overhanging eaves. Her sharp eyes caught a glint near a nail sticking out of the old fence. A scrap of paper had snagged there, half torn and fluttering faintly in the breeze. Agatha bent and retrieved it discreetly, folding it carefully into her pocket. It was too small to read immediately, but she felt the weight of it, an invisible thread tying this place and the people inside it to Bill's warning. Whoever lived here had left traces, and Agatha was beginning to trace them. As she straightened, her eyes flicked to one of the windows. Something shifted behind the curtain, a subtle movement, deliberate and controlled. Her heart skipped. Someone was definitely inside, watching her. She stepped back, letting her stance remain casual, not wanting to alert the person further. Her fingers itched to reach for the door handle, to push the envelope of mystery. But she knew better to act without caution. Before she could decide what to do next, her phone vibrated sharply in her coat pocket. Startled, she retrieved it quickly. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, no name, only a string of digits she did not recognize. She answered cautiously. A low, menacing voice came through, rough and deliberate. "Stop looking."
it said. "If you want to keep your friends safe, stop looking." Agatha froze, her mind spinning through the possibilities. Who could know she had been here? And how had they known she was even near the cottage? The voice offered no explanation, no warning beyond the threat itself. She clenched the phone tightly, feeling a mixture of irritation, adrenaline, and concern all at once. After a moment, the line went dead. Agatha held the phone at her side, letting the silence of the lane wash over her again. The curtains remained still, and the burnt smell lingered faintly in the air. She took a slow, steadying breath, letting her racing thoughts settle just enough to think clearly. Whoever was inside, whoever had called, was invested in keeping this mystery hidden, but Agatha Raisin was never the type to walk away from a challenge. She tucked the scrap of paper securely into her coat pocket, glanced one last time at the locked windows, and moved carefully back toward the main path. Each step made her aware of the quiet tension pressing from the cottage, a silent corridor of suspense that seemed to follow her as she walked. The village had transformed again, from cozy familiarity to a place of whispered threats and half-seen movements. And Agatha knew her investigation was only beginning.
Chapter 4. A Warning Repeated. Agatha approached the modest, semi-detached house on the quiet street, her mind still buzzing with the threats and clues from the cottage. The morning sun had softened into early afternoon, casting long shadows across neatly trimmed hedges. She paused briefly at the gate, taking a deep breath to steady herself before ringing the bell. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Mrs. Wong, her face pale and lined with worry. "Agatha," Mrs. Wong said, her voice thin and weary. She stepped aside, allowing Agatha in. The air inside smelled faintly of jasmine tea, though the tension in the room made it seem almost suffocating. "I wasn't expecting... you've come at a difficult time." Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured to a chair near the window. Agatha sat, keeping her posture calm, her gaze steady. "I need to know where Bill might have gone," she said gently. "He left the house worried, and I found some things that suggest he's in trouble." She didn't push, knowing that Mrs. Wong needed to speak in her own time. The older woman sank into the chair opposite her, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. Her eyes were glossy, rimmed with the beginnings of tears. He left very early," she admitted, her voice cracking. "He was tense, agitated. He told me not to speak to anyone about what he was investigating. I promised, of course, but I was so worried. I haven't slept." She paused, then reached into a small stack of papers on the sideboard and handed Agatha a folded newspaper clipping. Agatha took it carefully, unfolding the yellowed edges. The article described a theft from years earlier, a case that had remained unsolved involving a valuable piece of jewelry stolen from a local estate. Her eyes scanned the lines, noting details, the pattern of the theft, the timing, and a curious similarity to a recent string of small burglaries in the village. Something about it felt familiar, like a puzzle piece that had been misplaced, but now was being nudged back into view. "You see," Mrs. Wong continued, voice shaking, "Bill was obsessed with that case. He said someone might be repeating it, or that the past wasn't finished with us. I don't know more than that." She lifted her hands in helpless frustration. "I'm frightened, Agatha, frightened for him, for all of you." Agatha studied the woman's face, taking in the exhaustion, the fear, the unspoken worry for her son. She reached across the small gap between them, resting a hand lightly on Mrs. Wong's. "I promise you," she said firmly, her voice unwavering, "I will find him. I won't let anything happen to Bill. We'll figure this out together." Mrs. Wong's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded slowly, relief mingling with continued worry. Agatha could feel the weight of the promise she had made, not just to Mrs. Wong, but to herself. Bill had always been a stubborn investigator, someone who carried danger lightly, often brushing it off with a wry remark or a scowl. Now, knowing how worried his mother was, Agatha understood the stakes more clearly. She folded the newspaper clipping carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. her mind already mapping connections. The past and the present seemed to overlap in a way that left threads of danger dangling in front of her. Somewhere in the quiet corners of the village and in the shadows of old memories lay the truth about what had gone wrong before and what might be going wrong again. Agatha rose from her chair, giving Mrs. Wong a reassuring nod. "Stay inside and keep safe. I'll bring Bill back," she said, her tone leaving no doubt for doubt. As she stepped toward the door, she felt the cool rush of resolve settling into her chest. The mystery was widening, yes, but so too was her determination. She would unravel it, piece by piece, until Bill Wong was safe and the village's secrets were finally brought to light. Back at her cottage, Agatha placed the newspaper clipping carefully on the kitchen table, its edges curling slightly from age. She set the torn scrap of paper she had retrieved from the cottage beside it. The small piece of paper had seemed insignificant at first, but now, in the quiet of her kitchen, it demanded attention. The faint lines and typeface struck her immediately. There was something about the lettering that echoed the decades-old print of the clipping. She leaned closer, tilting her head, comparing the shapes of letters, the weight of the ink, the spacing between words. Slowly, a realization struck her. The scrap was cut from a newspaper of the same era as the clipping Bill had been carrying. He must have been at the cottage recently, searching, or leaving a trace. The thought made her pulse quicken. Every small action Bill took had a purpose, and she knew he left clues for her to follow when he anticipated trouble. Agatha tapped her fingers lightly on the table, thinking through her recollection of Bill. He had mentioned fleetingly a few times over the past weeks that some matters were unfinished business. At the time, she had teased him gently, joking that he left too many loose ends. But now, seeing the scrap alongside the clipping, she understood he meant it literally. This was not idle reflection. It was a deliberate marker, a breadcrumb for her to find. She picked up the clipping, turning it over carefully. Her eyes swept across the back, scanning for anything she might have missed in her first reading. At first, it appeared blank, save for a few faint pencil smudges. But then, catching the light at just the right angle, she saw it, writing in Bill's familiar, slightly cramped hand, a single name, underlined twice, faint but unmistakable. Agatha whispered it to herself, the letters forming a name she had heard only in passing, attached to a village rumor she had dismissed months ago. The same person now seemed to loom at the edges of the current mystery, connecting the past theft with Bill's sudden worry. Her mind raced, macking possibilities, weighing threats, and considering what Bill might have uncovered. She spread the clipping and scrap flat, tracing the lines with her finger, overlaying the pieces in various ways to find alignment. Each attempt revealed subtle hints, patterns, and letter forms that only someone with keen observation could discern. The evidence didn't yet spell danger in absolute terms, but it suggested a chain of events that was gradually tightening, circling closer to Bill. Agatha leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet of the kitchen settle around her. The sun filtered through the curtain, falling in soft bands across the table, highlighting the scraps and their tiny revelation. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit, though not completely, and the urgency that had been simmering now sharpened in her chest. Bill had left her a trail, a challenge, and perhaps a warning, and it was up to her to follow it carefully if she was to prevent harm and uncover the truth lurking just beyond the edges of the village. She tucked the scrap safely into her coat pocket, folded the clipping neatly, and allowed herself a moment of resolute. The danger was clearer now, but so too was the path forward, fragmented, hidden, and waiting for her to assemble it piece by piece. Chapter 5. The Stranger's Mistake. The soft chime of the cottage doorbell startled Agatha mid-thought, and she glanced up from the newspaper clipping and scraps still spread across the table. When she opened the door, an elderly man stood on the threshold, leaning slightly on a polished walking stick. His coat was worn, the fabric faded at the elbows, and his eyes, sharp though lined with age, studied her intently. "Mrs. Raisin," he said, his voice gravelly but firm, "I believe we need to talk." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, moving carefully but with purpose. Agatha motioned toward a chair near the window. "Please, sit. Can I offer you tea?" she asked, though she noticed the subtle shake in her hands, the tremor of someone carrying knowledge heavier than their years. "I'll pass on the tea," he said. "Time is limited." He pulled a folded piece of paper from the pocket of his coat, laying it on the table without another word. Agatha's eyes flicked to it, noting only the faint folds and faded edges. "The name on that clipping," he began, nodding toward the newspaper from Bill, "belongs to a man who caused scandal decades ago, a man who vanished before justice could reach him. Some in this village never forgot, and some have watched, quietly, patiently, for any hint that the past might resurface." Agatha leaned forward, her mind spinning as she connected the dots between the man's warning, Bill's note, and the mysterious cottage. "And you think it's resurfacing now?" she asked cautiously. He nodded once, sharply. "Yes. Be careful, Mrs. Raisin. Curiosity is a dangerous companion in matters like these. People are watching. Not all eyes are friendly. Do not meddle, or you risk more than inconvenience." His gaze locked with hers for a long moment, and Agatha felt the weight of his warning press into her chest. Before she could respond, he shifted, his coat brushing the edge of the table. "I've said enough. Think carefully before you act." With that, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a soft but final click. Agatha exhaled slowly, trying to steady the sudden rush of adrenaline and unease. Then, as her eyes swept the table, she noticed a small object she hadn't seen before. A faded photograph, edges worn, sat neatly where the man's coat had brushed. She picked it up, careful not to smudge the image. The photo showed Bill standing near the overgrown, ivy-covered cottage at the edge of the village, the same one she had already investigated. His expression was serious, wary, alert, as though he knew he was being followed. His hands were tucked slightly in his pockets, and his posture suggested cautious observation rather than casual presence. Agatha's heart skipped. The photograph confirmed what she had suspected. Bill had been close to the cottage recently, and someone or something had put him on edge. She studied the image closely, noting every detail: the surrounding garden, the broken fence in the background, and the angle of the shadows all matched what she had seen firsthand. Bill's gaze in the photograph seemed almost to meet hers, a silent plea to understand, to act, to follow the trail he had left carefully and deliberately. Agatha set the photo down next to the newspaper clipping and scrap. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a faint but urgent pattern: the stranger's warning, the past scandal, and Bill's cautious steps all threaded together, creating a tapestry of intrigue that was both chilling and compelling. She straightened, determination settling in her chest. She would follow this trail, carefully, but she would follow it nonetheless. Agatha walked briskly through the village, the familiar cobbled streets of Carsely now feeling strangely foreign. Each step echoed in the crisp afternoon air, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves along the hedges. She clutched the newspaper clipping and the small photograph in her coat pocket, her senses alert to every movement around her. Something about the quiet felt heavier than before, and a subtle prickle ran down her spine. She rounded a corner near the bakery when a flicker of movement caught her eye. A dark coat, the same as the one Leo had described, slipped behind a lamppost a few paces ahead. Her heart jumped. The figure's head turned briefly, scanning the street as if searching for her, or confirming her presence. Agatha froze for a heartbeat, then turned sharply. The figure ducked behind a doorway and disappeared from sight. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. Panicking would accomplish nothing. Instead, she moved deliberately toward the little shop that sold gardening tools and local crafts. Once inside, she slipped behind a tall shelf stacked with packets of seeds and small planters, peering cautiously through the gaps. Through the window, she spotted the stranger reappear at the corner of the street. He stood motionless for a moment, scanning the village as if assessing where to go next. Agatha pressed herself closer to the shelves, noting the angle of the sun and the shadows that concealed her presence. Her pulse raced, but she forced herself to focus. She needed to observe, to gather information, not to confront. After several tense minutes, the figure moved on, disappearing down a narrow alley leading away from the green. Agatha waited until she was certain she was alone before leaving the shop, taking slow, deliberate steps to avoid drawing attention. Her mind catalogued the encounter carefully. The coat, the quiet determination of the stranger's movements, and the unearthly sense of being watched. Her route took her past the churchyard, where the familiar path wound between ancient gravestones and overgrown hedges. She stopped suddenly, noticing something gleaming faintly in the grass near the base of a stone cross. Kneeling, she retrieved a small metal token, round and worn with age. The design etched into it struck her immediately. It matched the description of a token mentioned in the decades-old theft case from the newspaper clipping. The same object that had been part of the village's long-buried secrets now lay at her feet. Agatha's mind raced, connecting the dots, the stranger tailing her, Bill's recent visit to the cottage, the old theft, and now this token. They were all linked in some intricate web she was only beginning to unravel. Whoever had followed her was involved, perhaps even responsible for the resurfacing of old crimes. She pocketed the token carefully, glancing around the churchyard. The village seemed still once more, though she knew the quiet was only temporary. Somewhere out there, the dark-coated figure watched, waited, and moved with intent. Agatha straightened, brushing leaves from her coat, letting the tension settle into focused determination. The threads were tightening, and she would follow them wherever they led, unraveling the connections between Bill, the stranger, and the secrets buried for decades. Chapter 6. When Shadows Align. Agatha returned home late that afternoon, the streets of Carsely quieting as shadows lengthened across the cottages. The last rays of sun had slipped behind the hills, leaving the village bathed in a soft, dim light. As she opened her mailbox to check for letters or notes, a small, folded piece of paper caught her attention, slipped neatly between the edges of the flap. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't an ordinary note. The handwriting was angular and hurried, unfamiliar, and the words were stark. "Meet me at the village green after dark. Answers will come, if you want them." Agatha hesitated, a mix of worry and determination stirring in her chest. The village at night was quiet, almost serene, yet there was an unmistakable edge to this summons. Against every cautious instinct, she knew she couldn't ignore it. Bill's disappearance and the series of strange events pressing closer left her no choice. She tucked the note into her coat pocket and waited until the first stars appeared, then stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The village green stretched before her, dimly lit by a single lamppost casting long shadows across the grass. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Agatha's eyes darted around, alert to every movement, every rustle of the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a cat slunk along a fence, pausing to watch her with bright, reflective eyes. A figure emerged from the shadows near the far edge of the green. Agatha's heart skipped. Hooded, the figure approached cautiously, hands tucked into the sleeves of a worn coat. As they drew closer, the hood fell back, revealing a young woman, Leo's older sister. Relief mixed with surprise. She had not expected a familiar face. "Mrs. Raisin," the girl whispered, glancing nervously around the green. "I overheard something last night. The stranger. He threatened Bill. He dropped something when he ran." She reached into her coat and produced a small cloth pouch, worn and faintly dusty, and handed it to Agatha with trembling hands. Agatha accepted it carefully, feeling the weight inside. She opened the pouch to reveal a single key, small but significant. Its surface was engraved with intricate markings, swirling patterns, almost like an old emblem. Her fingers traced the lines, and she felt the importance of it immediately. This was no ordinary key. It was a piece of a puzzle, deliberately left behind, carrying meaning and urgency. The girl's expression grew tense. She said, "I shouldn't be involved," voice low, trembling. "I don't want anyone hurt. You should leave this alone. It's dangerous." Her eyes filled with fear, and she glanced back toward the street, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Agatha folded the pouch, keeping the key inside, and looked into the young woman's eyes. "I can't stop," she said firmly but gently. "Bill needs help, and I won't let fear dictate what I do. You did the right thing coming to me." The girl nodded, swallowing hard, her grip loosening as she handed the responsibility entirely to Agatha. The key seemed to hum quietly in her hand, a tangible symbol of what was about to unfold. The markings suggested something hidden, something deliberate, perhaps a location or a lock tied to long-buried secrets. The night deepened, shadows stretching along the green as Agatha pocketed the pouch and the key. She knew that the next steps, dangerous, uncertain, and crucial, were within reach. The threads of Bill's last known movements, the stranger, and the village's hidden past were converging. With a final glance toward the lamppost and the quiet cottages beyond, Agatha turned and retraced her steps toward the village, her mind alive with possibilities. The night had offered a clue, a warning, and a promise. Everything was about to unravel, and she would be at the center of it. Back at her cottage, Agatha set the cloth pouch on the kitchen table and carefully removed the key. Its intricate engraving caught the light from the window, shadows tracing the delicate swirls etched into the metal. She turned it over in her fingers, feeling the weight and smoothness, and a thought struck her. The key's design was old-fashioned, a style no longer used in modern locks, most likely from decades ago. It wasn't just symbolic, it was practical, meant for a storage building, a shed, or some long-forgotten corner of the village. Agatha's pulse quickened as she marked the location. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a way that suggested deliberate planning, a path laid out by someone who anticipated every move. She set the map aside, rubbing her temples thoughtfully. Every clue, Bill's badge, the scraps of paper, the photograph, the key, pointed toward this forgotten part of the village. Whoever had been watching Bill, and perhaps continuing the old crimes, had a reason to use a secluded building. And now the key was her chance to unlock that secret. Before she could gather her coat, a subtle sound at the door caught her attention. Agatha moved swiftly, checking the small slot in her door. A cold metallic object lay there, unmistakable. The same round token she had discovered in the churchyard earlier. Her fingers closed around it, noting its weight and worn surface. It had been left intentionally, a silent warning this time. Someone was aware she was following the trail. Someone wanted her to feel the danger more directly. Agatha took a steadying breath, slipping the token into her pocket alongside the key. Her mind raced, plotting the safest path to the old mill while keeping her senses alert for any sign of the stranger. She checked her coat for essentials, flashlight, notebook, gloves. Everything was ready. The sun had nearly set, and shadows were creeping along the lane, softening the edges of familiar cottages into shapes that might conceal observers. Locking the door behind her, she moved quietly along the winding streets toward the mill. Each step was measured, deliberate, yet driven by urgency. The metal token pressed lightly against her thigh, a tactile reminder of both threat and determination. Whoever was behind these warnings had made themselves known. Whoever had taken steps to obscure the past and protect secrets would not give up easily. Agatha's thoughts focused on the building behind the mill, hidden for decades, waiting for someone to find it. The key and token were tangible markers of a mystery that was converging now, pressing her forward. The village felt alive in a new way, every shadow a question, every turn a possibility. She moved with determination, alert but steady, knowing she was closing in on the truth and that the next discovery could change everything.
Chapter 7. The Mill's Secret. Agatha approached the old mill with measured steps, her boots crunching softly over gravel strewn with fallen leaves. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long silver shadows that stretched across the crumbling walls and overgrown yard. The mill had been abandoned for decades, yet its presence remained imposing. Broken windows, warped doors, and ivy crawling up the stonework like fingers trying to reclaim the building. Beyond the main structure, almost hidden beneath a tangle of brambles, she spotted the small outbuilding she had deduced from the map and key. Its door sagged slightly on rusted hinges, and the lock, corroded and stubborn, seemed almost to resist entry. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. She slid the key into the lock, careful not to make a sound, and turned it. The mechanism clicked with a reluctant groan. Pushing the door open revealed a small interior, cramped but clearly used recently. Moonlight slanted through gaps in the walls, illuminating a scattering of objects. A notebook lying open on a wooden crate, a small metal flask, and several pieces of paper strewn across the floor. Each item whispered the unmistakable signature of Bill's presence. Agatha kneeled carefully beside the notebook, brushing her fingers across its cover. The pages contained meticulous observations, notes about villagers, old connections, and cryptic references to the decades-old scandal she had seen in the newspaper clipping. Her eyes darted from line to line, recognizing the familiar handwriting and the sense of urgency embedded in each sentence. Bill had been here, studying someone connected to the past crime, evidence that linked decades-old secrets with the present. Her gaze shifted across the floor, taking in subtle clues she hadn't noticed at first glance. There were rope fibers caught in a splintered crate, small scuff marks along the wooden floorboards, and the faint indentation of a chair dragged roughly across the floor. Agatha's stomach tightened. Bill had not left voluntarily. Signs suggested he had been restrained here, or perhaps had escaped narrowly. Whoever had brought him, or confronted him, had done so carefully, leaving traces only for the observant to notice. She crouched lower, moving silently between crates, scanning the shadows. Every creak of the old building amplified in the silence, making her ears strain for the slightest sound. And then she heard it. Footsteps outside, deliberate, measured, approaching from the overgrown yard. Her heart skipped. She ducked behind a stack of crates near the back wall, pressing herself flat against the wood, trying to make herself invisible. The door groaned as it opened, and a figure stepped inside, muttering under their breath. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice, low and irritated, was unmistakable. She froze, every muscle taut. The stranger's words were clipped, angry, but familiar. Phrases and inflections she had heard before, connecting immediately to someone she knew from previous village encounters. Her mind raced. This was the person Bill had been investigating, the one tied to the old scandal, the one capable of leaving threats and tokens, and now standing just a few feet away. She inched slightly to get a better view without revealing herself, noting the figure's movements, hands clenched, pacing back and forth near the crates, eyes darting as if scanning for signs she might have left unnoticed. Her mind catalogued every detail, the coat, the gait, the muttered words, the careful avoidance of certain areas of the floor where rope fibers remained. This was no ordinary intruder. It was someone fully aware of the building's hidden features, someone who had planned their actions carefully, yet overlooked the traces Bill had left behind. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, a steady drum of alertness. She felt the weight of the notebook and flask, tangible evidence that Bill had been here, and tangible markers of danger he had faced. Every clue, every scrap of paper, every scuff and rope fiber made one thing clear.
The mystery was closer than ever to being uncovered, and her careful observation was the only way she could ensure she followed it safely. For a long moment, the stranger muttered again, stepping toward the far corner. Agatha remained perfectly still, holding her breath, knowing that in the next minutes the thread she had been tracing for days might finally begin to converge, and the answers she sought, hidden in the shadows, might reveal themselves.
The door creaked and banged shut behind the intruder, the sound reverberating across the small interior of the outbuilding. Agatha remained crouched behind the crates, heart hammering in her chest. For a moment, the echoes of his footsteps faded, leaving a tense, almost unbearable silence. She allowed herself a cautious breath, then inched toward the center of the room, mindful of the rope fibers and scuff marks beneath her feet. The intruder had gone, but the sense of danger lingered like a shadow stretched thin across the walls. Her gaze fell on Bill's notebook, still lying open where he had left it. She reached for it carefully, lifting the cover and flipping through the pages. Bill had been methodical, noting names, dates, and observations with his typical precision. As Agatha scanned the entries, a pattern emerged. Every cryptic note, every shorthand reference connected the stranger she had just witnessed to the decades-old theft case and to someone within Carsely itself. Agatha's eyes widened as she read further. The handwriting was meticulous, but the meaning was unmistakable. Bill had discovered the final missing piece of the puzzle, the accomplice who had helped cover up the crime all those years ago. One name, clearly underlined multiple times, jumped from the page. Her breath caught. She had heard it whispered in village rumors, but she had never imagined the depth of its connection to both the theft and Bill's current predicament. The revelation sent a shiver down her spine, part fear, part awe at the intricacy of the investigation Bill had conducted. She barely had time to process the discovery when a sudden noise made her freeze. The door slammed with deliberate force, rattling the old wooden frame. Agatha spun toward it, realizing instantly that it had been locked from the outside, or worse, trapped in some mechanism meant to confine her. Panic threatened to rise, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed a plan. Her eyes swept the floor, seeking anything that might offer an escape. The wood beneath her fingers felt uneven, and a faint outline of a panel caught her attention. She knelt down and pressed along the edges, discovering that one section of the floor was loose. With effort, she lifted it, revealing a narrow passageway leading into darkness beneath the mill. A faint draft whispered from below, carrying hints of damp earth and age-old timber. Agatha peered into the opening. The passage was tight, just enough for her to crouch and maneuver, and it descended into shadow. The thought of navigating an unknown subterranean route made her pulse quicken, but the alternative, remaining trapped with whoever had locked the door, was far worse. She slid the notebook and pouch into her coat pocket, keeping them close, and lowered herself carefully into the passage. The air inside the narrow corridor was cool and musty, a mixture of dirt and old wood that spoke of years without human presence. Agatha moved slowly, hands brushing along the rough-hewn walls, listening for sounds above that might indicate the intruder's return. She traced her steps along the uneven floor, mindful of the debris and roots jutting through the soil. The faint light from the opening above barely reached the first few feet, but she could see enough to navigate. As she progressed, Agatha's mind raced, cataloging the notebook's revelations and the new urgency of the situation. The accomplice, the hidden connections to the old theft, and Bill's own meticulous tracking, they all converged into a single, dangerous path. Whoever had orchestrated this had planned carefully, but Bill had left clues in his wake, subtle markers for her to follow. Every decision she made now would need precision and awareness, where the consequences could be severe. The passageway narrowed in places, forcing her to crouch lower, but she pressed forward, driven by resolve. She realized that the hidden path beneath the mill might hold more than an escape. It could be the very location where Bill had been forced, observed, or even held. The thought tightened her chest, but she steadied her breath. Danger, yes, but also revelation. Every step brought her closer to both answers and the next layer of mystery. Agatha paused briefly, placing a hand on the cold, damp wall, letting the darkness envelop her while she oriented herself. The notebook weighed heavily against her chest, its secrets burning with urgency. Somewhere ahead beneath the mill lay more of Bill's trail, and perhaps the key to uncovering the truth about both the old theft and the stranger who had threatened him. She pressed on, determined to follow the path wherever it led, the shadows of Carsely and its long-buried secrets stretching before her like a map only she could decipher.
Chapter 8. Bill's last warning revealed. Agatha crouched low as the passageway widened slightly, the musty air carrying the scent of damp earth and old timber. Her boots scuffed softly against the uneven floor as she moved cautiously forward, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The walls were lined with roots and occasional cobwebs, but the corridor opened at last into a larger chamber, moonlight filtering through a narrow grate above, mixed with the faint glow of her torch, revealing stacks of dusty crates and long-forgotten village records. Old ledgers, wooden boxes, and scattered papers littered the room, remnants of a time when this underground space had been used for storage. And in the center of the room, tied to a chair, sat Bill Wong. His hair was disheveled, clothes dusty, but his eyes brightened the moment he recognized her. Relief and concern collided in Agatha's chest. "Bill!" she exclaimed, hurrying forward. Kneeling beside him, she quickly worked at the ropes binding his wrists, careful not to worsen any scrapes he might have gotten. His hands lifted slowly as the knots gave way, and finally the last rope fell to the floor with a soft thump. "I knew you'd come," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I just didn't know how long I'd have before they realized someone had been following me." Agatha brushed dust from his coat and offered him a steadying hand. The warmth of his presence reassured her, even as the room's shadows whispered danger still lingering. Bill exhaled, collecting his strength, and began to explain. "I uncovered evidence linking the theft scandal from decades ago to someone in this village. Someone respected, someone no one would suspect. They were careful, orchestrated it so that the trail went cold, and when I started asking questions, I realized someone was willing to silence me to protect their secret." His gaze sharpened as he spoke, a mixture of frustration and grim resolve. Agatha listened intently, piecing together his words with the clues she had discovered over the past days: the metal token, the cryptic notes, the warnings. Each fragment suddenly made sense in context. Bill had been meticulous, following a trail that led him not only to the stranger, but to the core of a deception that had been hidden for years. Before she could ask more, a soft movement drew their attention. From the shadows near the back of the storage room, a figure stepped forward. Agatha's breath caught. The dim light revealed the familiar face, someone she had trusted for years in the village. The realization hit her like a cold wind. Betrayal flashed in the sharp outline of the woman's features. Her composure remained perfect, but her eyes were hard, calculating. "You've done well to come this far, Mrs. Raisin. But this is where curiosity must end." Agatha's mind raced, connecting this figure to the stolen past, the threats, and Bill's predicament. Everything clicked: the secret warnings, the carefully orchestrated obstacles, the pressure to stop the investigation. Bill shifted slightly, his expression wary but steady. "She's been protecting herself all these years," he murmured to Agatha, eyes flicking toward the culprit. "And she underestimated one thing: you." Agatha's heart pounded, but her focus sharpened. She glanced around the room, noting the crates and scattered papers, the narrow exits, the uneven floorboards that could aid a swift retreat if necessary. The stakes were higher than ever, yet the moment also brought clarity. The puzzle Bill had followed for weeks, decades really, was coming together, and she was finally in a position to confront it directly. As the woman's gaze swept the room, Agatha stood straighter, hands on her hips, masking the tremor of adrenaline in her voice. "The truth doesn't stay hidden forever," she said firmly. "And now that Bill's safe, we're going to see it revealed." Bill gave a faint nod, still catching his breath, as Agatha felt the full weight of the mystery converge in the shadows of the mill's underground chamber. The air seemed heavier here, saturated with the tension of betrayal and long-held secrets, yet tinged with relief. Bill was alive. The culprit's identity was no longer a puzzle,
and though danger had not disappeared, Agatha felt the momentum shift. The threads were untangling, and the long-awaited confrontation was only just beginning. The woman's composure faltered for the first time, her carefully cultivated calm giving way to sharp, unguarded confession. Yes, I orchestrated it all. The theft, the cover-up, the lies. I thought no one would ever uncover the truth, and when Bill began asking questions, I had to act. I didn't mean to hurt anyone permanently. I only wanted to protect myself. Her eyes darted nervously to Bill, who remained seated but alert, listening with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Bill's jaw tightened. You sent someone to silence me, threatened Agatha, and manipulated events to keep the scandal buried. Do you realize what you've done? How close we were to losing everything, including each other? The woman's lips parted as if to reply, but then she moved suddenly, attempting to flee through the shadows of the storage room. Agatha's reflexes were instantaneous. With a swift, practiced movement, she intercepted the culprit near a stack of crates, forcing her to the ground. The struggle was brief but tense. The culprit's desperation contrasted with Agatha's calm determination. Using leverage and firm grips, Agatha prevented her escape and, after a sharp shout, alerted the authorities waiting outside the mill. Footsteps approached quickly, and the sound of voices confirmed reinforcements were near. Once the situation stabilized, Agatha and Bill stepped outside. The first pale streaks of dawn painted the sky over Carsely, soft gold and lavender spilling across the mill's stonework. Exhaustion weighed on them both, but relief flowed stronger than fatigue. They settled on the grass, leaning against the old mill wall, listening to the quiet sounds of a village still asleep, unaware of the danger that had passed only hours before. Bill exhaled, voice low. I'm sorry for keeping secrets, for dragging you into this, for not being clearer. He looked at Agatha with genuine remorse, though the faint smile tugging at his lips softened the weight of his words. Agatha let a short, gruff laugh escape. Bill Wong, you have a talent for hiding things worse than anyone I know. Don't do it again. But you're forgiven. Her tone carried affection laced with her usual sharp humor, and Bill's lips curved into a small, appreciative smile. The dawn's light shifted, brushing their faces with a gentle warmth, signaling both the end of one mystery and the possibility of others. Birds stirred in the hedges, leaves rustled softly, and the village slowly began to awaken, oblivious to the night's events. Carsely remained its peaceful, cozy self, yet Agatha knew beneath its quiet streets lay more secrets, waiting for curious eyes and keen minds. Standing, she dusted off her coat and glanced back at Bill, who rose beside her. Together they walked toward the cottages, side by side, the morning crisp and calm around them. The case was closed, the danger resolved, but Agatha's curiosity, her ever-present companion, burned brightly. Carsely would have other mysteries, other puzzles, and she would be ready. The village might sleep, but for Agatha Raisin, the story never truly ended.